questions that we have for you from some of our attendees. And Dennis, attendee wanting to know, how do you think financial institutions could proactively manage money laundering risks? What are those steps that can be taken?
A very good question, and this is a question that occupies frontline staff at financial institutions as well as, of course, the board. In my view, one area where we're continuing to see lapses within financial institutions is their perhaps not a sufficiently proactive identification of typologies as they are developing. We saw in the proceedings against the Commonwealth Bank of Australia and Westpac that the type of typologies that were lending themselves to exploitation of both of those banks were in fact typologies which had been published by the APG. Notwithstanding that these were well advertised and publicised typologies which should have been brought to the attention of the bank seems to have not taken those on board. Subsequently, insufficient controls were in place in the bank, so they had this significant vulnerability. So being proactive about perhaps scanning the horizon, being very closely attuned to the perhaps innovative means by which criminals are constantly exploiting loopholes within financial institutions and trying to remain ahead of the curve so that the banks are properly arming themselves defensively and proactively in order to immunise themselves is something that banks cannot afford to cease doing. This is an ongoing requirement for financial institutions. They need to remain very, very vigilant. And the closer interaction they have with groups such as the APG, but also more closer relations with law enforcement, will give them the heads up and will allow them to at least create the most favourable environment for themselves to remain ahead of the curve.
Excellent, Dennis. Jesus, thoughts on that, on the proactive ability to manage money laundering risks?
I would say, in terms of proactive, one of the things that I've seen is focused on resources and training. Training, I think, in particular, could be a valuable resource to proactively just think about trends and things happening in the industry that might be applicable to certain financial institutions, and it could be applied and integrated into training that will then, I think, could be effective to proactively just understand sort of the current environment, changes anticipated, and how staff, in particular, Dennis mentioned frontline and other staff could really be in tune to sort of what's happening, typologies that are more prevalent, how the regulatory landscape is changing, and how that applies to institutions, and particularly also for institutions that are changing, growing, or changing products, services, or other sort of scenarios that might be developing. So I think I would highlight training as a good way to be proactive.